All right, welcome back. This one's for the athletes or anybody who's competing, who has a competition or a one-off event. This is where we're going to look at what you should eat before, during, and after competition. Before we get there, we have to talk about something called the glycemic index. The glycemic index is just a scale of how quickly foods increase your blood glucose or your blood sugar levels. Foods that are high on the glycemic index, like white rice, sugar, pure sugar, glucose, white bread. These things are high on the glycemic index, and things that are lower are things that have more fiber in them, like oatmeal and such. The things lower are going to have a more sustained blood glucose and thus a more sustained insulin response. We know that when we eat high glycemic index foods, that our blood glucose goes up. This causes insulin to come up to help bring the blood glucose levels back down. And the glycemic index is actually just a scale from 0 to 100, and you can actually Google like anything, glycemic index of white bread, glycemic index of eggs, whatever it is, and that's going to tell you how quickly your blood sugar is raised after you eat the food. And this is going to be important for performance. All right, we're going to talk about what you should be eating 3 to 4 hours before competition, 60 minutes immediately before, an hour before competition, and also what you should be having during competition, as well as after, what you should be doing for recovery. A couple things that we need to follow along here. So when we perform in sport, when we perform anaerobically and even aerobically, the one thing that we really need to do that helps us with performance is muscle glycogen, the glycogen stores, the stored glucose. After you wake up from sleeping, it actually takes about 3 to 4 hours to fill up your glycogen stores. So that's why we look at 3 to 4 hours before. 3 to 4 hours before a competition, you should be having a high carbohydrate meal. Okay, high carbohydrates because we want blood glucose, we want it to be available, but we don't actually want a high glycemic index. We want a low to moderate glycemic index food, carbohydrates, to slowly release the glucose, to slowly get that energy. Okay, and there's a couple things that we want to avoid. We actually want to avoid fats. Fats take too long to digest, to absorb, to break down, and to give energy, so we actually don't want fats. Okay, so your fats, no fats in your pre-competition meal 3 to 4 hours before. When it comes to protein, a little bit is okay because it'll actually help a little bit sustain the muscle damage that might be done during competition. But the problem with protein breakdown is when proteins get broken down to amino acids and they get further broken down, that takes water, and so we get a little bit of a dehydration effect. So we don't really want much protein, but a little bit is okay. Okay, so let's look at what you should have 60 minutes before, immediately before competition. Some coaches think that this is the time when you should have a high glycemic index food. Get those blood glucose in you right away. That's what's going to fuel you, get it in you right away. However, there's a problem with this. When you take high glycemic index foods, yes, your blood sugar levels, your blood glucose levels go up very quickly, but your insulin also goes up. And in fact, you will actually overshoot your insulin. Your insulin will go up so much that will cause your blood sugar levels to go back down to almost dangerous levels. And we don't want this, okay? This is gonna affect the ability to bring glucose into the muscles, to store it as muscle glycogen, and it's actually gonna break down the muscle glycogen that you already have. So we actually don't want high glycemic index foods. We want low to moderate glycemic index foods with not as much fiber now. We shouldn't have a lot of fiber because we want that fuel right away. Again, no fats, no protein. We don't need that. We just want mostly carbohydrates. We want a low to moderate glycemic index. Okay, let's talk about what you should be having during competition. During competition, again, this is where, again, it's carbohydrates. Carbs are king when it comes to performance. This is where you can have some moderate to high glycemic index food. And again, we don't want really high. We don't want like the 90s and 100s on the glycemic index. We don't want that insulin to go too high. The main thing here during is that we're sustaining our blood glucose levels. You're working, but we also want to sustain those blood glucose. So moderate to high, and again, with a little bit of protein is helpful. This helps that you don't get so much protein breakdown. And like a 4-to-1 carb to protein ratio, gel or something, bar, energy bar, whatever, during is actually helpful. Again, these should be things that are easily digested, like gels, like the fruit gummies, that kind of stuff. Those things are what you should be having during. And when we talk about recovery, after you've performed, your muscle glycogen is nearly completely depleted. So you want to be able to restore those as quickly as possible. And the earlier you can do that, the earlier you can get high glycemic index carbs after. So high glycemic index should be reserved for really after the workout or after the performance, and protein as well. And it appears that the earlier you get protein in there as well, the more of that repair that you're going to get. So after you're recovering, high glycemic index carbohydrates with a fair amount of protein, probably about 20 to 30% of overall meal of protein, and a little bit of fats is okay to slow the absorption, but it's not necessary. Again, carbs are king. So these are what we should be doing before, during, and after competition. Give it a shot, guys. This will help you optimize performance.